Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And it's time for another top 10 list. Boy, it's been a long time since I did a top 10 list of best songs from whatever applicable artist. Last one I did was BT, and if you don't count that since it was a top 20, then the last one before that was Jean-Michel Jarre. And both of those were well over a year ago before I actually got a mic. I miss these. They're usually really fun to make. Assuming their individual tracks give me enough to talk about and highlight individually, which is why I skipped a proper top 10 video for Biosphere and just did a worst to best ranking. For Autechre though, I'm doing both a top 10 and a worst to best ranking to finish the series off, because both videos feel like they could add to the discussion in a way that my regular reviews wouldn't necessarily. Now, you may notice that this video only highlights my top 10 favorite tracks from these guys, and some people may be wondering, how the hell is it possible that you managed to narrow it down to that? Haven't these guys released like 53 gazillion tracks and every single one of them is innately qualified to be someone's #1 spot? Well, yes, and spoilers, there's 20 honorable mentions in this video, and honestly it was very difficult to narrow it down to that few. These guys have a crap ton of amazing tracks. It's entirely possible that your top 30 could be comprised entirely out of tracks that are not mentioned in this video. But why then, you may ask, was this not stretched out to a top 20? Well, honestly, as many great tracks as these guys have, only a very small select few stick out to me in particular as stuff that really resonates with me on a personal level. I've said it before, I'll say it again, Autechre are not one of my favorite bands of all time. I have a ton of respect for their craft, creativity, consistency, etc., but not much from them does a lot for me on an emotional level. Hell, technically if this video were a top 8, then it would have been much simpler and easier for me to put together than a top 10. Trying to figure out which tracks would fill out the last two spots among a sea of great tracks that I all hold in roughly equal regard was no easy task. But if I could do a top 10 for Aphex Twin, I could fit these guys in a top 10 as well, and so I did. So I guess let's get through the usual disclaimers that this is just my opinion and you can feel free to disagree with it. There is like a 0% chance that your list is exactly the same as mine, and that's fine. Just don't try to make the case that your picks are any better or worse than mine or anyone else's because, oh, these are objectively the best crafted and best produced or whatever arbitrary metric you want to go by. At the end of the day, these are ranked on which tracks mean the most to me personally. And I was a little more biased towards tracks that I was already a fan of before I started the series rather than standouts that clicked with me more recently. Not all of the picks necessarily apply to that metric, but just something to keep in mind. This list isn't the be-all and end-all. I may even disagree with it immediately after posting this video. I probably will, actually. A lot of different picks have come and gone over the past couple of months. My top 5 is pretty nailed down, though I don't really see those spots changing, but yeah. Enough of that, let's finally get into the top 10 best Autechre songs. Number 10, Autechre from Coarseness. So yeah, we're starting with less than 3-minute ambient fragment and a completely non-indicative album intro which sounds like nothing else on said project, beating out tons of their way more technically advanced pieces that are surely much more impressive or exciting to listen to. I don't know what to tell you. This made the cut over all those other epics as it's one of the tracks that first helped me get into these guys. Even if the rest of Coarseness doesn't sound much like this, it still pulled me into the crazy world of that album, which is underrated as hell by the way, and getting into the rest of that project eventually convinced me to appreciate their other weirder material. But the fact that nothing else in their catalog sounds like it is kind of what's helped it resonate as well. It's nothing more than a couple of moody, shifting paths forming a foreboding but futuristic atmosphere, and it doesn't need to impress you with anything further, showing a way more subtle side to their work that they so rarely explore. Autechre may be short, it may be minimal, but that doesn't make it any less impactful a moment for me. Don't underestimate it. Number 9. Stud from Try Repeat. Try Repeat is a weird album for me as it takes lots of harsh industrial sounds that might ordinarily not be my thing and presents them in such a way that I can get into easily. And I don't think there's any better example of that than Stud. You got a glitchy, fuzzy beat that sounds like some kind of weird buzzing scanner tunneling directly into your ear canal and forms a really slow, stodgy, and pretty much undanceable 3/4 groove, going up against echoing clicking noises, off-key melodic stabs that you might not even notice are there until your 10th listen, and of course that rough but strangely organic sounding bass line that repeats at the same pace and even has some whistling feedback to harmonize with it. All stretching on for a whopping 9.5 minutes. You wouldn't think a track like this would work so well together, especially for someone like me who might be quick to call a similar sounding track grating and annoying. But it absolutely works. Its weird mix of sounds not only comes together really well, but is also really catchy and can possibly get stuck in my head. I can easily recall what it sounds like even when I haven't listened to it in several weeks. And it doesn't feel like it overstays its welcome either, despite its length and not having an absolute ton of progression. It feels like it finishes at exactly the point it needed to. I don't know what else to say. It's the kind of weird track that only Autechre could pull off so well, and has stuck with me for years. Number 8. Bike from Incunabula. What does one even say about a classic track like Bike? It's the kind of track that could just start plinking away in your mind with one glance of Incunabula's track listing. It's one of those defining tracks of an era and genre that no one can really deny. Maybe you'd think it's overrated, I could see that given its age and popularity, and especially given how much it pales next to their later work from a technical production level. And obviously the artificial intelligence sound was kinda done to death in the 90s, and as such it may be very dated. But I don't know, to me it's more like an example of why those sounds became so commonplace. All those other IDM artists from the same scene wish they could make a track as iconic and easily recognizable as Bike. And on an album full of easily memorable classic IDM riffs and melodies, Bike is practically Incunabula's theme song. From its ever-catchy, plinky melodies to its just as memorable, smoother synth washes that show up halfway through, to the fact that it's 8 minutes long and feels like 3. For me, its appeal holds up just as strongly as it probably did for people first hearing it in 1993. It's almost too important to ignore, but for me that's only a good thing. Number 7. Exide from Exide. Alright, enough of the early stuff and more simplistic side of Autechre, let's talk about a track from Exide, one of their most dense, consistently exciting, and technically insane projects they ever put out. Right from when I first heard this track in high school, even in the days of when I couldn't make heads or tails of the storm of weird details that passed over this album's 2 hours. This one stuck out to me immediately, alongside one other I'll get to. Exide follows a formula that many other Autechre tracks over the years do, starting out relatively innocent and descending into complete madness by the end. Here the beginning is almost calming, with some light electric piano chords and 80s-ish drum textures, but other textures overtake it, like those screeching chords and the drum patterns breaking down and playing off the previously formed pulse, and eventually the whole thing submerges in a sea of low-key buzzing darkness by the end. And even though it's almost 7 minutes long, it's one of those tracks that you could basically blink and miss it in the album's context. It fits so naturally next to the other tracks around it, despite baiting you into thinking you're about to get something more normal sounding in its opening moments. Nothing from Autechre, especially beyond the 90s, is ever that normal, and this just happens to be one of the most memorable and compelling moments of their later period work for me. Number 6. Sublimit from Untilted. Alright, here we have the one exception on the list to my bias towards tracks I was already into before doing deep dives on all the Autechre albums. This is a track that really only revealed itself as one of the big standouts in their catalog while I was doing work on my review of Untilted. And I wanted to include something from that album. Now, it's worth noting that, especially as of recently, Autechre doing a 15-minute track wouldn't necessarily be noteworthy. The similarly giant tracks on albums like LSEC and NTS are slow and glacial, they have tons of open space and feel like they're stretching your perception of time. This was not really a thing yet in the era of Untilted, where Autechre opted more to pack tons of details into every second of every track and make sure you were never bored. There's other tracks like Airlight Get Zero from Exide that have the same roller coaster ride effects that most of Untilted has. That track just barely missed the cut from this list and ended up as an honorable mention. But Sublimit made the list because of just how damn fun a ride it is and how satisfying and epic a closer it is for Untilted as a whole. It shifts through like 5 different phases that all sound satisfying and distinct in their own right but still link together naturally. It's also worth noting that Sublimit manages to keep my interest the whole way through despite barely containing any melody at all. Its beats and textures do all the work and it's still continually exciting and riveting throughout all 15 minutes, much like something like Orbital's Are We Here? Also, the chopped up horn sections in the second part might have helped cement itself even further. I do quite like that part. It's admittedly not a track that I listen to by itself very often. It works best as the insane payoff to the ride of madness that the rest of Untilted takes you on, and even Untilted itself is still an album for a specific time and place and not something that I put on all the time either. But there's really no better way to describe Sublimit than mind-blowing. And underrated as hell. Number 5. Yuto from Try Repeat. Okay, going back to obvious iconic Autechre standards that pretty much everyone knows and would already expect on a list like this, to the point of I could see others not including it because it's too obvious or even overrated to them. But how the hell could someone not like Yuto? As the most openly melody-centric moment on Try Repeat, it still fits with the harsh and industrial vibe of the rest of the album, but does it in a way that obviously sticks out to any first-time listener. You're just hit with giant layers of pads that forcefully screech and blast directly into your face, like radiation from some nuclear explosion in the distance, with its mix surging every few beats like power lines to your entire town going on the blink. But it's still got an easily danceable beat underneath that forms later because, why not? Plenty of tracks later in the Autechre discography. My mouth is working well today. Plenty of tracks later in the Autechre discography could form the same sense of foreboding epicness that this track does, but Yuto pulls it off in just a little over 4 minutes with one fairly simplistic groove. I don't think anyone can really deny that it kicks ass. Number 4. Blade Lords from Exide. Alright, you know how when I was talking about TS Exide that there was one other track from this album that stuck out to me immediately on first listen? Let's talk about it. Blade Lords is one of those tracks that I almost kind of have to sit back in reverent awe at. Its dense application of reverb on basically everything creates such an imposing and incredible sense of space. Its slow plodding techno beats and even dubstep influenced webbing bass going up against giant washes of pads that sound like choirs. It's a moment of jaw-dropping cosmic beauty in the middle of so much dense and occasionally even claustrophobic dark beats on the rest of Exide. It was the one track that I could mark as an easy favorite from the album, even in my days of thinking almost everything Autechre did was too experimental and out there to be enjoyable on any level. Now, admittedly, overplay may or may not have started to set in as of recently, and it started to feel like a bit of a drudge on some listens, which I kind of had to ignore for this ranking because of how long it's been a favorite. But still, even at the absolute nadir of my enjoyments, this track is a masterwork of production that well justifies its 12-minute running time. But as amazing as Blade Lords is, there are 3 other tracks from these guys that hit me on a much more personal level, and maybe aren't as frequently mentioned as all-time Autechre standards. Number 3. Fern from Confield. Autechre and jazz aren't really two concepts that you'd ever really associate with each other. Maybe some of their newer stuff could have an improvisational flair, I don't know. But Fern is the one time they directly flirted with that genre. This track always kind of felt like the real opener to Confield, with VI's Ghost Poise as his warm-up and intro, introducing you to the crazy and off-the-wall world of technical insanity that is Confield. Feeling like you're slowly drifting down a black hole and watching everything around you get swallowed up into darkness. And then Pen Expert shows up and kicks the album into high gear, and it only gets more nuts from there. When I first heard Confield, I thought it was not my thing, but Fern immediately stuck out as great because of its present vibraphone melodies in the beginning. Always gonna be a sucker for vibraphones as long as I live. But while at first these beats might have felt all jerky and jolting around at complete random to throw you off, once I discovered its more triplet-focused groove that the whole track is built around, it turned from awkward and jumpy to really loose and laid back, while still definitely banging. And thing is, Confield still isn't one of my big favorites in the Autechre catalog. It still kinda gets to be a bit much, and mostly loses me in its last third. None of the other tracks on there really come close to Fern personal enjoyment-wise, besides maybe Pen Experts, but it's still not that close. But I know whatever I think about the project itself, I'm gonna continue to come back to this track out of context over and over, so compelled by the way it smoothly and dancingly drags me into experimental hell. I don't think I've ever gotten sick of it. Number 2. Silverside from Amber. I remember back in the old days when I first reviewed LSEC 1 through 5 and inadvertently attracted a side of the fanbase who were not happy to see me talk about my long-standing problems with the duo in a slightly condescending way. And one of the most controversial moments of that review was when I made the pretty broad statement that Autechre tracks have no emotion involved whatsoever. Now, it may be true that very little of their stuff garnered genuine enthusiasm out of me at the time, but even then, I was exaggerating when I said that. If absolutely nothing else, I knew Silverside existed, and that is a tearjerker if I ever heard one. Even from the very beginning when I first heard it. If you'd asked me in 2016 or before then, this would have been my number 1 favorite track of theirs without any hesitation. The synth strings create such a lonely and desolate and chilling atmosphere. It feels like the end of a movie, but it's ended in the most unsatisfying way for whatever applicable main character. They've realized that they're now completely alone in the world, and this is the music that accompanies that realization. It's so harrowing and dramatic, and the thumping beats and garbled voices in the background only intensify the experience for me. Even if I often feel like I'm the only one who considers this to be easily the strongest moment from Amber, I'm gonna continue to stand by it. It's a simple track, but a powerful moment in their catalog, unrivaled on an emotional level by any other track of theirs. But before I get into the number 1, here's some honorable mentions. Acro Year 2 from LP5. V-Proc from Draft 7.30. Earlight Get Zero from Exide. "444" from Incunabula. Hypatial Section from Untilted. Column 13 from NTS Session 4. Yolquin from Amber. Latent Call from LSEC 1 through 5. Cavity Job, not an album single. Sea on Sea from Oversteps. Ursidio from Try Repeat. Gold for Rap 5 from LP5. Flutter from Anti. Keechley from Chiastic Slide. YJYUX from Exide. Further from Amber. V-Letter Mix 21 from the Garbage EP. Sim from Coarseness. Pen Expers from Confield. Drain 2 from LP5. Stepping there for the sake of brevity, there are dozens more that could be included. Even the buffer music and the track I played in the video's intro, they barely missed the cut. But, yeah, let's finally finish this off. Number 1. Lowride from Incunabula. So, I feel like some people are gonna find this pick to be kind of an anticlimax. I imagine people are gonna be like, really? This is your number 1? That's kinda lame. Even Silverside feels like it has more weight and importance and emotional resonance and like a better place to end a video like this. Lowride is a lot of things, but a big emotional tearjerker it is absolutely not. But the thing about Silverside is that I have definitely had listens of that track where it didn't hit, where I wasn't in the mood or I'd overplayed it and it lost its effect. Lowride tops this list because it is the only Autechre track, and I mean the only one period, that I can listen to anytime. This is a track that I can put on and get into no problem even when I'm not in any mood to listen to these guys. I could probably put this on after a full run through of the NTS sessions and it hit exactly the same way. It has the same calming effect on me that a Sounds from the Ground track does, amplified by those groovy piano samples that run through most of it. Perhaps unsurprisingly, those pianos are my favorite part of the track. But not to mention, it's a track that I can easily play back in my head without listening to it, or maybe even while listening to something else entirely. Those main lead melodies are so easily memorable and sticky, something I always appreciate. And the old school artificial intelligence sounds and retro drum machines work into the groove in such a natural way that make it one of my favorite tracks ever done in this style, if not my favorite period. Possibly discounting 8592 in its entirety. But the one thing that makes Lowride such a personal standout is that it is probably the single least pretentious thing that Autechre ever made. It's so laid back, content with the world, even friendly, delivering simple feel-good vibes and not remotely trying to impress you like 90% of Autechre material does. And its more muted tone makes it the kind of track that can ease me from a bad mood to a better mood. That has to be what has led this track to be by far the track from this duo I've listened to the most. I didn't really even have to think about putting this at number 1. I knew it would be before I even started work on this series in the first place. There may be so many other tracks that I imagine resonate with other people on a deeper level for various different reasons, but Lowride is the one Autechre track that feels like it really resonates on my level, and as such, is my personal favorite track of theirs overall. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.